Us speakers were given a task, a little homework assignment, as we start thinking about this conference. When it comes to psychology and spiritual formation, we were asked to pose a crucial question that needs an answer, okay? Fortunately, we weren't asked to provide an answer, just a crucial question, which is always much easier to ask a question, isn't it, than to provide an answer for that question. And so as many as you know, I've been working on the topic of gratitude for over 10 years, 15 years now approximately, and writing about gratitude, doing research on gratitude, speaking about gratitude. And we have discovered in a lot of different ways that when it comes to gratitude has the ability to heal, to energize, and to transform people. In other words, gratitude works. And that's the basic thing that I've been trying to demonstrate and convince people of and persuade people and show empirically the various ways in which gratitude works. And it does. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. However, I do want to discuss this big question that exists. And the question goes something like this. If gratitude is so good for us, why can it be so difficult? Why is it sometimes that we stumble when it comes to gratitude? Why is it that so many people have issues with practicing gratitude? Why is it that complaint seems so much easier than compliment? That disappointment seems so much easier than delight, and the list goes on. Grievance is so much greater than gratitude. So here's the question, the big question that I came up with, which is, what must we overcome as culture or as individuals for gratitude to flourish? In other words, for gratitude to really deliver what it promises. What are those obstacles or things that get in the way? Someone mentioned this morning, I think it was Dr. Tan mentioned that there's this positivity bias toward a lot of the topics that are studied. I study and my colleagues study in positive psychology. We focus on the good things about gratitude. Isn't gratitude great? And won't we be all so much better off as individuals and in our families, in our schools, workplaces, churches, if only we practice gratitude? And all we need to do is realize that and keep our little gratitude journals and get all our gratitude apps on our phones and write gratitude letters and make gratitude visits to everybody who's ever influenced us in our lives, and everybody would be better off if we did all these things, right? But that fails. This approach fails to recognize that there are things that get in the way. There's obstacles. There's difficulties, right? That we're trying to live grateful lives, but because we have flaws and limitations because of human nature, it's not always that easy to practice gratitude. So one obvious candidate that must be overcome as a culture or for individuals for gratitude to flourish, of course, would be ingratitude. I'm going to talk about ingratitude, but first I just want to mention, I want to dedicate this talk and my paper that will become a contribution to the volume that from this series, from this conference, to a friend of mine passed away earlier this year, a Jesuit priest and psychologist, Charles Shelton. Charlie was at Regis University in Denver for most of his professional life, and I learned a lot about gratitude from him, from his Ignatian perspective. He practiced gratitude. It was all about who he was and what he did. And he was very passionate about the topic. And he was also a very clear thinker. He thought it was very important to think clearly about gratitude. And evidently he never wanted his picture taken because I tried to find an image of him to put in this presentation. I couldn't find hardly any. But this was one of them. And it's interesting that he's obviously thinking clearly, thinking deeply. He's counting something, right? Something probably about points about gratitude that he wants to make. His book, The Gratitude Factor, is one of the best ones I've read. Really thinks deeply about the nature of gratitude and what it is and what role it should play in the Christian life, and what are some of the obstacles, things that get in the way of developing a deeper gratitude consciousness, as he might refer to it. So thank you, Charlie, for all your work. I want to begin then with a quote about ingratitude from Ignatius of Loyola, who said this: In the light of the divine goodness, it seems to me that ingratitude is the most abominable of sins, and that it should be detested in the sight of our Lord and Creator by all of his creatures who are capable of enjoying his divine and everlasting glory. It is a forgetting of the graces, benefits, and blessings received, and as such is the cause, beginning, and origin of all evils and sins. Now, of course, that's a perspective from centuries ago, but I could find contemporary illustrations as well. Here's one. This was an editorial in Theology Today, okay, and it was entitled On Gratitude. It's on gratitude, but this is how the author begins. He says, everywhere one looks these days, one finds unhappy and upset people. Elected officials and media pundits focus on what is wrong with the country, and especially with their political opponents. People in the limelight, athletes, musicians, stars of stage and screen, seem only to want more and more and are never satisfied. Parents demean their children, children blame their parents. Students, teachers, and administrators perpetually complain about one another. Obviously, he's never been to Biola, right? Anyway, advertisers make it clear in thousands of ways. Nervous laughter, I know. That's better. Okay. Advertisers make it clear in thousands of ways every day that our lives as consumers will never be meaningful or sexually fulfilled until we purchase their products. We live in a culture of deficit, demand, and desire. One deep root of the pervasive discontent these days would appear to be ingratitude. The inability to appreciate the gifts and benefits one has received from others, from circumstances, and from God tends toward bitterness and eventually inhumanity. Okay. Certainly Ignatius knew that. This author knew that. A central theme in Ignatian spirituality is that of gratitude. They say about St. Ignatius that he was filled with imperishable gratitude. If not helpless gratitude. Another writer, biographer of Ignatius, said that he was stirred to profound gratitude. Okay? I don't have that much to say about Ignatius. Actually, from the time I submitted the abstract that's in your program to what I actually thought I would talk about when we were given that question, I changed a little bit. However, I noticed after my talk, there's another talk about Ignatian spirituality in one of the breakout sessions. So if you want to learn about Ignatius, go to that one. You won't learn much more here about Ignatius. But anyway, I still have some good things, I think, to communicate to you about this issue about what gets in the way, what must be overcome as a culture or as individuals for gratitude to flourish. And I started thinking about a topic I've reflected on a bit, and that is various ideas, misconceptions, if you will, biases we hold when it comes to gratitude. And I've called these gratitude myths. These are beliefs that people hold, both Christian people and non-Christian people hold about the nature of gratitude, which can easily get in the way of practicing gratitude, of living a life filled with gratefulness. And so I'm going to suggest there's 5 of these myths, and then I want to show ways in which these are all just that. They're myths. They can be challenged, they can be busted, they can be exploded, these myths, when we actually look at some of the proof or evidence toward each one of these. Okay, the first of these, well, I'll just list the 5 of them, and then I'll go through each one of these. There's more than 5, but I found it useful to think about lists in terms of 4 or 5. There's as much information as I can hold in my mind at the time. So one of them is that gratitude is just a form of positive thinking. These are things you may have heard people say about gratitude. It's positive thinking, right? It's kind of a denial of reality. You're just focusing on all the good stuff going on in your life, or all the good stuff going on around you. It's merely a stepping stone for personal happiness. It's just a strategy or tactic to become happier. List your blessings and then you'll be happy, and so forth. And that's the only reason to engage in gratitude, in order to become happier. Number 3, gratitude strips people of initiative and makes them complacent. Have you heard this one? They don't try very hard. We'll just be satisfied and won't work very hard, expend much effort if we're grateful. It could lead us to become lazy, is what they're saying, or even passively resigned to a situation that could be changed with some action. If we were less grateful for it, we might do something about it. So they say, obviously, it's something that gets in the way of useful and effective action. Okay. Number 4, this is a good one. You have to be religious to be grateful. Don't you? I hear that a lot when I give talks to public audiences, and someone will ask the question, they come up afterward, and they say, usually in kind of confrontational way, are you telling me that I can't be grateful because I'm an atheist? And I don't know where they get that from, because I've never said anything to lead them to think that in the talk. At least I don't think so. So there may be something that just, is concerning to them. We tend to associate things like gratitude and thankfulness with spirituality. I mean, for good reason, but then they go to assume that you cannot have that way of existing in the world unless you first have certain beliefs, for example. And then the last one, number 5, when it comes to the formation, developing gratitude as a personality trait or as a virtue or as a way of life, it's something that you go out and get. I can work harder and become more grateful, and I have to do that in order to have gratitude. That's still another myth. So in terms of what Charlie would say, we want to think clearly about gratitude. One way to think clearly about gratitude is to consider various myths that people hold about the nature of it. And then we can be in a better position to communicate what gratitude actually is when people ask us the reasons for why we're grateful, or why should I become a grateful individual. We can say, okay, this is what it is, this is what it's not. As Ev Worthington has done so well with forgiveness, sometimes you have to start by saying what forgiveness is not, and explore and explode various myths of forgiveness. So it is, I find, as I study and learn more and more about the nature of gratitude. So here's one. Gratitude is just another form of positive thinking. Well, it's not really. And if you think deeply about gratitude, if you look at how people define gratitude, it seems it doesn't have a whole lot to do with just thinking in a positive way. For example, it does require a more elaborate set of cognitive processes. You have to become aware, you have to recognize, it requires memory. There's thinking and there's thanking, and you can't be thankful without being thoughtful, and sometimes being thoughtful means thinking at various levels, at various degrees of depth. Here's a couple of definitions by people who think deeply. David Harnett, a religious scholar, said this about gratitude. When he defined gratitude, he called it an attitude toward the giver and to the gift, determination to use it well, to employ it imaginatively and inventively in accordance with the giver's intention. Okay? That doesn't sound like just thinking positively about something, does it? Nor does this definition in their book, Bertocci and Millard. These were two philosophers. You can always count on philosophers to get to the essence of something, right? To think clearly about the nature of something. This is what they do. And so when it comes to gratitude, being sticklers for conceptual preciseness, I think this is a good definition as well. The willingness to recognize the unearned increments of value in one's experience, whether the emotional response of gratitude is present or not. Even if you don't feel grateful, gratitude is still there if you're willing to acknowledge and to recognize that you've received something of value that you didn't necessarily deserve or merit or earn. Also, though, by action suitable to the value of that it has been received. So not only do you know something, acknowledge something, perhaps, and not necessarily feel something, you also are required to do something about it. Okay? That doesn't sound like just positive thinking or happy thinking. There's a lot more that goes with it than just that. In our research, we found that gratitude does in fact amplify positive feelings, positive emotions. When people keep gratitude journals, when they're given assignments to write gratefully about something that's happened before in their lives, even something bad in their lives, they write gratefully about what they've learned from it. Their positive feelings are amplified. Their negative emotions and feelings are not necessarily diminished, as you would predict from a simple positivity hypothesis, right? If gratitude made you feel good, you'd feel good, you wouldn't feel bad, right? In fact, though, we find that gratitude often co-occurs with what are typically thought of as the negative or unpleasant feelings, levels of anxiety, anger. I still remember the first study I did with gratitude journaling. We found that people were assigned to keep gratitude journals. When you compare them to control conditions in our random assignment studies, people keeping gratitude journals, they actually scored higher on self-reported levels of anger and irritability than the ones who are actually focusing on what was going wrong in their lives by writing about everyday stressors. Oh, that's so weird. Why would, keeping gratitude journal make you angry and annoyed and irritated? And I still don't have an answer for that 15 years later, but I just say that sometimes there's a co-occurrence because of when you become open to the positive emotions, you may become open to the negative. It may deepen both types of the valence of both emotions, perhaps. Maybe they didn't like to be in the study. I don't know. There was cranky people in there. You ask them to keep a gratitude journal, and they get mad at you. They say it's stupid, it's silly, it's a waste of time. That could have something to do with it, who knows. But again, it goes against the simplistic notion that the more gratitude you have, the less unhappy you're going to be. It doesn't necessarily work that way, although you do have the magnification and the intensification of the positive feelings. And you certainly have the element of indebtedness, a sense of responsibility, a sense of obligation to do something good with the gift, to pay back the gift. That's not necessarily easy to do. It's sometimes easier not to have obligations and debts, right? So lots of pieces of evidence there we can string together to show that it's more than just positive thinking. One of the techniques that we use to activate gratitude in the laboratory is to do what I call remember the bad. This comes from my book, Gratitude Works, which I actually stole from the Harvard minister, Peter Gomes, who talks about doing just this. He says, think about your worst moments, your sorrows, your losses, your sadness, and then remember where you are now. Where you were then, you survived, you've made it through that, you're making your way out of the bad, the dark. Remember the bad things and then look to see where you are now. It turns out that's a very effective way of activating gratitude in the present by remembering where you were in the past. Again, that's not focusing on the good, that's focusing on the bad, yet it seems to work. Okay? Well, I think we've argued that point long enough. Gratitude is more than positive thinking because it's a virtue throughout history, going back centuries. All great things have been said about the nature of gratitude. It's the parent, not the greatest of the virtues, but it's the parent of all the other virtues. Nothing's more honorable than a grateful heart. A French philosopher more recently said that gratitude is the most pleasant of the virtues and the most virtuous of the pleasures. So throughout history, gratitude has been seen as an excellence of character, as a virtue, as a strength, not just way of looking at life in a nice, positive, happy way. Similarly, ingratitude is a profound moral failure. In fact, there's much stronger things said about ingratitude than there are things said about gratitude, which is interesting. So gratitude is a virtue, but ingratitude is an accusation, right? It's a profound vice or moral weakness. There's a few quotes right there. There's the one from Ignatian, others from Kant and Hume and Seneca. It's bad, right? You don't want people to say that you're an ungrateful person. That reminds me, Mother's Day is coming up real soon, so don't forget, Mom. Right? Real soon. Yeah. Okay. So how can it be just positive thinking, right? It's much more than that at a number of different levels. Number 3, so that actually was 1 and 2 at the same time. It's not just a way to become happier. It actually is a strength that makes life better for others as well as for oneself. It's related to giving back. We'll talk more about that shortly. This is one I hear a lot, that it makes people lazy and complacent and passive and so on. They actually don't work too hard if they feel grateful. Yet, in fact, we find in our research, we've done some studies which I think partially answer this question. When we ask people to tell us goals that they want to achieve, things that they're currently working on, projects or goals or concerns. What do you want to accomplish in the next month or 6 weeks or 2 months? We asked this in one study. We had them rate these goals, divide them into different categories: school-related, academic, vocational, relational, health, spiritual goals. And when they were keeping a gratitude journal, they were actually more successful at making progress toward these other goals and other life domains, but at the same time, they were not satisfied with the progress they had made. It wasn't like they were, okay, yeah, I've made this much progress, I'm going to cross this one off now. I've helped one person today, that's good, I can move on now. I can delete that one from my list of goals, helping other people, right? It wasn't that at all. They were still striving, still working. Even when we had them rate gratitude with respect to that goal. Gratitude for that chance to work on that goal was related to more striving to keep getting better and making more progress toward that goal. So even at the level of the goal itself, there was no complacency seen as a function of gratitude. So we can argue that on these empirical grounds as well. So that's another approach one can take that I think can be very convincing to folks who think that gratitude makes you lazy. All right, where else? You have to be religious to be grateful. It's something that only religious people do, okay? Now, it is the case, and I've made this distinction before, there is something distinctive to Christian gratitude, okay? Christian people do and should experience gratitude in different ways for different reasons across different circumstances than do non-Christian people. And here's a small list right there. I don't have time to expand on all of these. That could be an entire talk right there. But we know that giving of goodness to someone, being kind to someone, doesn't depend upon anticipated gratitude. That might be a very important one. Number 3, so much of the time, we give things to people because we expect them to be grateful back to us, right? And then if they're not grateful, it's like we cross them off the list. No more gifts for you. I'm not going to send any more gifts to my niece, lives the other side of the country because I don't get a thank you note from her. But, the true giving is it's irrelevant that she says, thank you. She should know better, of course, and her parents should teach her that. But if I'm giving her a free gift, it doesn't require a response. Okay, and that's right. Amen. The Christian notion of giving is that when Jesus heals, the lepers, knowing full well that 9 of them are not going to come back, he doesn't hold back the giving, right? Obviously, he knew that they weren't going to come back, but he heals them anyway. But yet our giving is often contingent upon expected gratitude. I'll talk about grace in just a minute as I wrap up. One of the things people often, take Christians to task on when they give praise and gratitude to God in public settings, whether it's athletes giving thanks to God or celebrities. When Matthew McConaughey won the Academy Award, did you notice that when he gave thanks to God? He said, I want to thank God. And then people, all of Twitter was blowing up. How could he do that? And others just ignored what he said, and most criticized him. Because the assumption is that if we give credit to God, thereby there's less credit to be dispersed to other people, to human agents, right? And they think it's either or. You either thank God for something, a blessing, or a healing, or something positive happening to you, or you attribute the goodness to other people. They couldn't possibly be both. It couldn't possibly be both, right? And I think that's another myth that exists here. We actually did research showing that people who score high on our trait measure of gratitude, by nature, they're grateful individuals. They actually are much more liberal in their ability to give thanks to a wide variety of sources or agents in their sphere. So they thank God, they acknowledge their own effort, their own ability. Parents, we ask 6 different skills or resources: attractiveness, intelligence, physical health, material possessions, athletic ability. And is it due to you, to genes, to luck, to God? And the more grateful people saw more of these sources, they stretched their range of attributions, as we say. They didn't limit to one or to the other. So there's no reason for these folks to be upset when someone gives thanks to God, because they're also acknowledging the roles that others are playing. Okay, number 5. Let me mention that one briefly. Looks like there's about 5 minutes left. So gratitude is something that you go out and get. And that's something I've been thinking about recently, the past few months or so, as I think about my own growth or lack thereof in gratitude. I've confessed this in public settings before, that, my wife will say to me, how is it you're supposed to be this big expert on gratitude? You're like the least grateful person I know. And she says that. And she might be right. I think she needs to meet more people because there's others out there, but anyway. Doesn't matter. She's on to something, I think, about ingratitude. And I used to think it's because I needed to go out and get more gratitude, try harder to become more grateful, strive more, do it better, And I was never very good at keeping these gratitude lists and journals, despite all my writing about the benefits of doing so. I never found that easy to do. And I would get an app on my phone to do a gratitude exercise. And then I would do it for a while, and then I would forget. And then I would feel bad about the fact that I forgot to do it. And even when I was successful at it, it didn't make me more grateful. It's like I just crossed it off my to-do list. I felt more relief than gratitude in getting it done. So then I started thinking, well, maybe, it's really not about going out and getting what I didn't have. I think maybe that's a specific case or illustration of spiritual growth. Does it really require us going out and getting more forgiveness or more generosity or getting more humility or getting more love or patience or gratitude or whatever? And I started realizing that now, even though I've written books about ways to go out and get more gratitude, really maybe the answer is just living a deeper realization of what I already have, right? And that's where the gratitude comes from, living in that reality, not going out and getting that which is lacking. It's like contentment, right? You don't go out and get contentment, right? I don't go looking for contentment, do you? Right? You have a deeper realization of that which you already have, an acceptance of that, and that's what contentment is. So I think maybe in many respects it's the same thing about gratitude. Whereas if you go out and get it, the focus becomes more about the self. That's what it was. I was focusing on what I wasn't doing or even what I was doing, and then I felt great when I journaled or when I did my gratitude app that day, and bad when I didn't do it. When I realized it really wasn't about me, it was what other people were doing for me that I couldn't do for myself. That's what gratitude was about. It was acknowledging what God had done for me, what I hadn't done for myself, that I couldn't do for myself. That's what gratitude was about, and just living in that reality. So not going out and getting it, but seeing that which was already there. Okay, this is at the end of the spiritual exercises, there's a prayer, which I can never pronounce. It's Suscipe or something like that. Is that pretty close? Suscipe, where it's about the prayer of a generous and expansive heart that has received all as gift and returns it all freely. And this is the prayer right there of Ignatius of Loyola. I think that's a very important component of gratitude. It's not just the taking in the good and acknowledging that, but also giving back or giving away the goodness that completes the cycle between receiving and giving. And Charlie Shelton, again, my friend, this is really one of the themes that he expands upon and what he believes that Christian gratitude is all about. It's all about giving back the goodness. In fact, he defines it as a giving away of the goodness, acknowledging the goodness in ourselves and then giving back or giving away that goodness. And he says this: our natural capacity for gratitude is the central point at which God's grace touches us, drawing us into the loving union, which is the theological virtue of charity, and making that love fruitful in action. So I like that. It's really about this giving away, taking in the goodness, accepting that goodness, then giving back or giving away that goodness. So Christian gratitude then inevitably leads us to the topic of grace, living in that awareness of who God is and what God has done, as opposed to going out there and trying to get more gratitude. So some of you know this already, and I came and spoke at the seminar back in the spring about the grace, and I want to move to that topic next. Not next today, because there's 3 seconds, 2, 1, things time. 0, I'm all done. No, there's a clock back there. But the next topic that I take up, I think one that's really been ignored, not so much obviously in the church theologically, but grace psychologically is something we could study. Can we study it, the nature of divine grace, right? Is that something that could be, really examined and explored? How do you study this? How do you ask questions when people say they've been, touched by grace? Or as Kelly Kapik says, God's grace finds us. We don't go out there and search for the grace. It's like this point I made. You don't go looking for the grace, but grace finds us. Is grace, people say it transforms them, transforms their lives. Well, how? In what ways? I think those are very interesting questions. There's a ton of these that can be asked, and that's the next topic on the agenda for me. Personally, there's one big question we could ask about the nature of grace. The notion that, hey, we didn't create ourselves, we didn't fashion ourselves out of nothing. Okay? We didn't ask for life, but here it is. So isn't that the case that, it positions us under grace as the most fundamental reality of our lives? Is the experience and perception of God as a gracious giver the central healing dynamic that enables us to move toward maximal well-being, fulfillment, and flourishing, psychologically, morally, spiritually, and physically? And that's what this is all about, right? Why we're doing this, psychology and spiritual formation. What is it that allows for and enables flourishing in all its various manifestations? And I would submit that, grace is as good a candidate as any. And then what are the obstacles, roadblocks, the myths that surround grace? Why is it that for many people it's so counterintuitive and such a radical concept that it doesn't make sense? That it's just so out there. It goes against, our desire to make things happen, to get stuff that we think we deserve. But in fact, grace is, unmerited favor given to us despite what we do and who we are. And so I think that's the natural next step to studying gratitude, particularly in the spiritual context, spiritual formation, is that having to do with the nature of God's grace and how that impacts and affects humanity. So I think I'll wrap it up right there. Thank you.
Have you studied or thought much about the difference between someone who experiences gratitude but can't express it compared to someone who doesn't feel grateful but goes ahead and does that willful act?
Yeah. Generally, we don't make that distinction in our measures or in our methods. I'm interested much more in the interior life. So I'm interested in people's experience of gratitude and those circumstances in their lives for which they're grateful, or as a person disposition, their way of looking at life, so they see more gifts. All of life is a gift. The expression itself, not so much so. I haven't really examined that part of it. But we know that other research shows that there's benefits that people write these gratitude letters and they go and actually make contact with the person, the recipient, and share that letter. There's more benefits to doing that than just writing the letter per se. So obviously you have that extra added component. And any emotion is not fully completed until it's expressed. Right? So I think that's a critical component of it as well. I haven't made that distinction as much because I'm more interested in the internal experience of it. But I do think that for those who have difficulty with developing the disposition of gratitude, they often do start from the behavior, from the expression of it, right? As they cultivate the habit of gratitude, of saying thanks, and then what they find is that the inner attitude then follows from the behavior changes. Of course, a long history of that in psychology, that the attitude, internal change follows from the behavior change. And that's how we teach our kids to do it, to develop gratitude in the first place. But mostly it's the internal experience that I focus on.
Have you found that there's a relationship at all between socioeconomic status, belief in the just world, and gratitude?
Yeah, I haven't looked at belief in a just world so much. There is absolutely no correlation between socioeconomic status and gratitude, which often surprises people. There are those who say that, well, they would expect that the correlation is a positive one, that with, the more you have, right, and more resources you have much more to be grateful for. And there's others who say, well, no, that because then you start taking everything for granted, and it's those that, as Dr. Tam mentioned this morning, the ones who know what suffering is, they don't take anything for granted, so they have much more gratitude. It's a much deeper level of gratitude because they realize that they might not have this, right? And so on. When they do studies of gratitude and they compare nations around the world based on, GPA or whatever index they use, again, you don't find a correlation. In fact, when you do find any relationship, it's oftentimes those nations that have a lower overall GNP or GPA that GPA with grade point average. That actually goes with gratitude, by the way. Our stuff with kids finds that the smart kids actually are more grateful, but that's not your question. So there's actually very little correlation, but when there is, it tends to be in the negative direction rather than the positive direction.
How would you model how to have a grateful heart and attitude when you're in like a non-Christian environment or a family with a non-Christian?
Yeah, I mean, again, the myth is that you have to, be a Christian to experience gratitude, express gratitude. Obviously you don't, just like, forgiveness or generosity or any of these other, virtues. Obviously it's going to look different. The motivation is there, right? We have different sources to rely on for why we're grateful or how to maybe display it, based upon text traditions and teachings and so on. But it's becoming aware of noticing, kindness and acknowledging that. Right? And giving back the goodness that you've received, right? And, that's going to transcend, traditions and texts and teachings, and believers and unbelievers, will notice this. And then, I think that's the best way to teach that. We've done research with kids and their parents. We say, well, parents want to know what's the best way to teach gratitude to my kids, right? So the number one question that parents have, the number one fear that parents have, is that their kids will grow up to be entitled. Yeah, I always thought it was that they were afraid they would come back and move in after college. But actually, that's number 3 on the list. Number 2 is their health. Number 1 is how can I prevent them from becoming entitled, right? And then from that they get to gratitude. Okay, and so part of the problem. And the answer I often give is not the one they want to hear, which is, well, you cannot give to your kids what you yourself don't have. And so they themselves don't have gratitude. You can't transmit that because of what you say. It's all, what virtues are. You catch them, you don't teach them, right? And so on. So we find that it's modeling gratitude, it's reinforcing gratitude. Those are the 2 main behaviors that parents engage in. That is the way that gratitude gets transmitted intergenerationally.